In an era where technology plays an increasingly dominant role and companies are being told, digitize or die, is there still a role for human talent? And if so, for how long? From major advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning to the growing use of self-service platforms at retail, where do people fit into Industry 4.0? Can machines and bots do it all? If they can, is this the future vision that we aspire to? I'm Jane Singer, and welcome to A Seat at the Table. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Stephen Patton, whose visionary view of the future of industry includes vital roles for both man and machine. As Regional Director of Asian Sourcing for Liverpool Department Stores, Stephen played a pivotal role in helping his company navigate through the pandemic, thanks to his adept management of his supply chain. Early on, he foresaw how the pandemic could potentially escalate beyond Asia. This led him to make strategic decisions that resulted in Liverpool having the right inventory at the right time when some of their competitors did not. Stephen attributes Liverpool's success to the strength of its human resources and by using technology to empower those people so they can do even better work. Before we jump into our podcast, if you're struggling to get your sourcing forecast reports done or you need a sharp, well-organized view of the market, then the current situation in sourcing could be the answer to your prayers. You can learn more about the current situation in sourcing in the show notes for this podcast. Now, let's sit down with Stephen and learn about what Liverpool has achieved by humanizing and digitizing their organization. Thank you very much for being willing to talk about, I think, what's a very important concept. And I think a lot of people are sensing this, maybe they're not talking about it yet, and that is the idea of the human side of a world that's moving faster and faster towards digitization. So I think that we've spoken about this before, and I've heard you speak at our FashCon conferences, and I think you have some very interesting insights into how you see this being managed.
Of course, well, obviously my involvement with you and with everyone at Inside Fashion comes from many years ago. So I've been fortunate, obviously, to always count on your network and forum to open a space for ideas and discussions. And I think as you mentioned, we've started some of the conversations in the past of we have to humanize before we digitize, and maybe that reflection was still relevant in 2016 or 2017 when we started that discussion, but it spoke about a promise of where we were heading based on all of the incremental digital platforms and all of this excess availability of tools and available resources. And I think to your point, one of the things that's happening is that this is already here, whether we want to recognize it or not. And what we have to kind of take care of now is not how do we humanize before we digitize, but how do we maintain our human side while we are digitizing? How do we prevent ourselves from becoming so isolated that it becomes a number?
So when you look at it in terms of, let's initially start with the workplace, how do we bring this forward? What are you seeing?
I think at the end, tools are tools, and they're available. Or readily available for many of us. I think the natural essence of the person is what's being tested and it's being brought to the front line again. There was a time in which talent itself could speak for itself, and I think that's what I've started to notice maybe within the workforce. When you're not surrounded by let's call it a social construct of an office, then you become the owner of your time. So you start testing yourself of saying, did I used to complain that I didn't do something because of lack of time, and was that actually a lack of time or a lack of discipline or interest, or have I shifted but it just became normal for me to discuss on Monday morning that kind of what we are doing or what I think is important. I think with the available time that everyone has and with the amount of mandatory isolation, I think you're forced to do some sort of introspection of saying, well, all of a sudden I get to be in contact with myself again. And I think the first relationship we end up having to nurture or to heal or to recognize is that one with ourselves. And how does that contribute back into our social network or family network? And I think my deepest learning on all of this is that I think the situation, regardless of how connected or how digital our businesses were, what it's shown us is that we're not going to be able to get through this on our own. And we need one another, and we need to be connected. And as soon as it was mandated that we couldn't see anyone, then we started to miss everyone. So we find ourselves in this natural state of we are social beings, and even though you may say like, well, uh, Paul from accounting is a little bit difficult, and but you miss that maybe quick banter from the
Right.
office from Paul from accounting. So I think it's kind of part of what I've seen here with my team and with our corporate office back home. It does put a test of what a company like the one that we work in, what it's required, and the true nature of people come through. And when things get tougher, you see how people are willing to go that extra mile in order not to survive, but to put their best foot forward.
I think it's interesting, the points that you're bringing up, because I think prior to this pandemic, there was a mindset that felt that so many things could be replaced through various automation, through digitization, through technologies, and the role of a human being within an organization was being somewhat diminished, particularly at a lower level or even a mid-tier level. And I'm wondering if this pandemic has perhaps shown us that there is a need for both. Of course, you need automation and digitization in order to have better efficiencies. But on the other hand, do we need that human element that's almost an intangible element?
Of course, I think there's this sense of ownership of the relationship. At the end of the day, when you reach out and there's no one there that can maybe touch your hand, or you don't have someone at arm's length, it even though you can do an email, it still doesn't feel the same, or it doesn't taste the same. No,
Absolutely.
there's nothing like closing someone at a meeting, or seeing the expression on someone when you're giving them some good news rather than through a Zoom call. And it can almost feel some sort of impersonal, and you get internally tested of saying, I would have wanted to tell you this in person. It's something that I've continuously listened to in the meetings. And in some cases, what you end up figuring out is that we focus more on sharing what's important. And on the contrary, you can also take those conversations and saying, well, that could have been an email. So you start to differentiate what could have been an email or what should be an email, and the types of conversations or interaction that you would rather have in person. And I think that's something of value, because we start to assess that true nature, or the value of our counterparts in every interaction.
I think that because this pandemic has extended for as long as it has definitely driven home, like you were saying, the value of that human connection. I think that people are starting to realize that you do need other people, in the sense that, no man is an island.
No, for sure. I think the saying of two heads think better than one. I think that's naturally evident. Now, in some cases, the ability to tackle problems, it's not based on lack of talent. It's just maybe based on a lack of focus, or lack of information, and everyone's context on a specific solution can bring to a better or more expedite solution in some of the cases. I think as all of this started to progress, well, you and I were in Asia when all of this starts. So obviously we were reacting in real time, and maybe the other half of the world was like, Steven, you're overreacting. This is never going to get to that point. Well, but it's better if we prepare for let's prepare for the worst case scenario. Now, you're focusing way too much. I don't think that's going to happen at all. And it starts to happen, and you start to kind of put the things together, and you start to see how one thing interconnects with the other. And I think situations started to evolve in a point in which, great, well, we'll be in home quarantine for maybe 2 weeks. No, so it's like it's a good break. It's maybe spring, so we get a little bit of time off. I don't have to be at 100%. I get to be home for a little bit, and then schools started to shut down, and then businesses started to shut down, and the number of cases started to expand, and more countries started to get shut down, and then there was lockdowns, and then full lockdowns, and then mandatory lockdowns, and then cases exploded. So I think that the sheer scale of what this means of even though we thought we were being isolated, we are much more connected than we would have imagined, because this doesn't spread by email. This was done because of person to person connection. So obviously, it's because we were unwilling to give that up that the numbers went up in the first place. So it tests the nature of the human being. If I can sound romantic on that sense of, it does get to the point in which it tests the very nature of the human being. So I'm not really willing to sacrifice everything in case something could happen that has never happened, is likely to happen.
So in other words, what you're saying is that, in a sense, people's reaction to this pandemic is sort of a testament to that true desire for human connection, because even in the face of something that's potentially life-threatening, but certainly that could make you very ill, people still opted to be in a human face-to-face interaction, whether it be at work or in social situations, rather than first opting to protect themselves.
Exactly, because I think regardless of the explanation that maybe we gave ourselves, or that we went along, it didn't really matter if you trusted the explanation or not, but the problem was evident, and if not, that's what was triggering bigger issues around it. So it's maybe not the case that everyone had a fatal conclusion because of this, but it certainly projected or expanded the impact that something like this could have had. So I think by the same nature of saying, I don't think that's going to happen to me, I could frame it negative and say, well, people were being selfish. And it's not that they were being selfish, it's that you were asking them to give the very thing that makes them or identifies them as a social being. So it's the toughest thing that someone can put on the line in order to say, well, until it became unavoidably necessary, people were not willing to give up that social connection.
I think that's a very good point. If you're looking at the concept of humanization in a world that's moving more and more towards digitization, how do you see that balance? How would you optimally see that coming through in the context of a workplace or of a business organization?
I do think that tools contribute an enormous amount of value to the workflow. I think there's a lot of things that become mechanic that if we learn how to automate within ourselves, we would even give us additional headspace to kind of work on what we are truly talented. Because even though someone is gifted at, like a gifted mathematician or a very talented financial analyst, the strength is not that they manage Excel better than anyone. It's just that they understand the abstract conclusion of the numbers presented quicker than someone else. So I think if you're able to empower those people to have more resources in a shorter amount of time, their true talent of making better decisions with the information available becomes an even higher asset, rather than just saying, well, yeah, he's really good at Excel. That's not really a talent. You can learn how to use the tool. You need to know what to do with the information. Otherwise, it's the best information with the incorrect conclusions doesn't really propel you in the direction that you would be wanting. So I think all of this will continue to allow us to expand on our true talent.
I think that sometimes we become a bit dazzled by what technology can do, and we forget the role that a human mind plays, particularly in terms of being able to differentiate what we do from what somebody else does.
Yes, of course. I think the ability to take a look at something and make something new out of it, which is ultimately what we try to do day after day, season after season, or collection after collection. And even though the market is trending into seasonless collections or seamless transitions from one season to another, we do live in an environment that is affected by weather. So whether we want to call it fall winter or not, or we want to call it a seasonless collection, the reality is that July and December floor sets will never be the same.
Right.
There has to be some sort of differentiation, and I think we can call it many things, and I think it's part of kind of the transformation of in our case the apparel section or the retail section. Christmas comes in December, and we set it in September, so it doesn't matter if we want to call it something else. It's still going to be on December 25th. We're going to have to plan accordingly, and we're going to have to get those designers in within time to get the factories up and running with the productions and the shipping lines in time. But I think all of this situation also demonstrated how fragile our global supply chain is, because at the first incident or at the first kind of promise of chaos, the pendulum effect came into place, and there was a massive market overreaction. And by the time it corrected, it was too late. And when the cyclical kind of nature of the market returns, I think there's going to be a gap there that is, I don't know if too many people were laid off. I don't know if too many orders were canceled. I don't know if too many factories closed down, or if it's the natural flow of the market and we were already in a saturated market and this is just a market correction. So I don't have a complete read on that. It's not our case. So we overreacted, which was in our experience and kind of Monday morning quarterbacking it on September 9th. We were correct in overreacting because that made us better prepared, and we were able to make the decisions when we needed to make the decisions without affecting everyone around.
I think what you were telling me when we spoke a few weeks ago is that you were very prescient in terms of seeing where this pandemic might be going, and you had prepared for a worst-case scenario, which has in fact stood you in better stead than perhaps some of the other companies.
Yes, we were very fortunate to have our team here. So at first, when we needed support, we were able to kind of take refuge in Mexico and our New York office, and we had information flowing from Asia, from my office, and then from New York and from Mexico, and we were able to make that triangle of kind of contribution. Once the market started to shift, because after Asia came the US, and then the US shut down, and our New York office shut down about 3 weeks before our Mexico City headquarters. So by the time Mexico City shut down, Shanghai was up and running at 100%. So we took not only our work back, but everything that the company needed us to take back and more. So it also proved that what we had thought that we could do, and what we had been maybe saying or promising that the team could accomplish, with the tenure. Our office has been here for 10 years, so obviously you have a team of very highly specialized technical operators and merchandisers and technicians and quality controllers and logistics personnel, and they're all saying like, well, if we were able to do more, maybe we could do more.
Right.
And then the condition was given that we needed to do what we thought we could do and even more. So it was a test on everyone of there's no way you can handle it from there. You have to cede control to whoever is operating, which in this case was Shanghai. And it was the same test here, because it was a cultural balance of saying, well, my local staff here is very apprehensive, by nature. So when you have to give away the decision making power of some of the process, it becomes a challenge also on what you feel comfortable with. But trust cannot be measured by the sense of urgency. It just has to feel right.
Right.
So if you're not at that level of empathy and trust with your counterparts, then it means it's more of a cultural challenge than a procedural change.
Interesting. Well, I think that's some of what we've learned from this pandemic, where we've been forced to do things that we wouldn't normally have done and take on responsibilities that were things that we hadn't handled, but now we had to jump in and do it. So I think the question is going to be, what do we take away from this? Because at some point this pandemic will pass. It will not continue on in perpetuity. So what will be the takeaway? What are you seeing?
I think the interconnection of everyone was put forward once again. I think this maybe wrongful condition of competing beyond what is ethical or competing beyond what is acceptable, what you would normally put on the wall as a vision statement or the company values. I think all of those were set forth again, and companies and people stood by their values. And I think those that were built on strong foundations are the ones that will be better kept. You've heard me say it before that this disruption affects the unprepared.
Right.
If you're able to see and act accordingly to what you think you are and what you say you are, then the conclusion should be quite natural. You should be able to continue carrying on successfully. I think if you outsmarted suppliers, you may get the short-term benefit of reporting maybe a slightly better loss this year. But at the end, as you mentioned, this is going to pass, and what you're going to find is that factories are no longer willing to work with. No, you compromise the long term for a short-term, maybe wrongful objective in a year in which this was the year to miss on the mark. It was a tough year for everyone, so this is the year that we could have maybe sold on potential complexity. But if you carry this to 21, to 22, to 2023, then it becomes more an issue of execution. And I think that's the next cycle is what is going to truly test the nature and the power of companies, regardless of what the nature. And I think we've spoken to this in the past. Everyone that said that there was an imminent retail apocalypse coming in 2022 clearly never saw the sales difference between a retailer that depends on their stores opening and their e-com channel. So even though there was massive growth on e-commerce and that stabilized a lot of the companies, it still doesn't compensate the sales loss of having stores shut and the amount of people that have to go home. So our commitment has to be somewhere beyond the bottom line, or it has to be far beyond the bottom line.
I think that's a very important point, and I think that increasingly companies have really been run on a very short-term vision of how do we get from one quarter to the next. If we look at the future vision that some people hold, which is whether it be our industry or other industries, where it's increasingly done by AI, by bots, by very sophisticated technology that people see as sort of taking over some of the jobs that people do. How do you see that playing in at the same time having this concept of humanization?
I think there are some activities that are substitutable, if that's a word. I do think that there's a lot of value in information if you're able to extract correct conclusions, or if you're able to look at it under the correct eyes. But I think the mere definition of artificial intelligence is machines are built to mirror the behavior of the human mind, or at least that was in essence what it began with. And then it became data analysis, and then it became ARs and VRs and machine learnings, and then deep learnings. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out what people are going to be thinking in the future. I haven't heard many people saying, I want to know how the machine of the future is going to work. I want to try to know what people will think next.
Right.
So I think the person continues to be the center of the equation. And I think as long as we recognize that, everything that we do to build around it should be done with the underlying understanding that this is to improve social condition.
I think one of the challenges that we might face going forward is how do we square increasingly advanced machine capabilities with the importance of the human side of things and human capabilities. I mean, where is a human capability not being able to be duplicated by a machine?
And I think to your point, our objective would be to be better, not to be.
I think that really sums it up: to be better, not necessarily faster, but better. You know, we've become so focused on speed as the ultimate goal, and I think that this concept of actually being better, maybe not faster, maybe not more, because I think more is another concept, right? The idea of how do we have more, where we haven't thought about, but is it any better? Is it just quantity for the sake of quantity?
Exactly, and I think that's those kind of models are the ones that were tested first. And you've seen the market take take the toll. It's the brands that cease to offer value, and maybe it was the discounted price, but eventually that you stop buying after a while, even though it's so you don't need more. Or when situations like this, which are out of the ordinary, come up, then you start sacrificing some of the behavioral patterns that you had of maybe I don't need that 127th $1 T-shirt. And when everyone starts to take that, no, that's when you lose that kind of business model, and it comes back. And we, to give you an example, we had that situation happen in Mexico. We are continuously tested in the online market by third-party marketplaces. So when supply chains were robust and everyone had their seasonal inventories coming in, then there was a lot of competition in the market. But once you stop being able to travel and you don't have a local office and you don't have a structured supply chain, all of those third-party vendors start running out of inventory and they're not able to revamp their offering. They don't have the necessary information to buy what's coming up next. And you start to see a lot of smaller vendors in marketplaces like Amazon in Mexico, it's Mercado Libre, or Privalia, and it's all of these discount sellers that all of a sudden ran out of inventory, and the market migrated back to where they knew they could always find the level of service and quality and delivery that they've grown accustomed to receiving. So our brand was temporarily hit by an opportunistic market, but it very quickly corrected because people were not looking for more, they were looking for better.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point because, as you were saying earlier, we went through a very long phase where people put quantity over quality. It was sort of a novelty because as apparel and other things, prices got cheaper and cheaper, people could afford to buy more and more. So people went in that direction. And then they got to a point, as you were saying earlier, that you ended up with a house full of stuff. More became less desirable and better became the thing that people wanted.
Yeah, and I think one of the kind of the structural changes behind all of this is that we, as retailers, either we stopped or we began selling what people needed to buy rather than what we wanted to sell.
Yes, you're absolutely right about that.
No, so I think that market reconfiguration, it in economic theory, there's like, it's the pull market versus the push market. But I think this was done in a very short cycle, and if you weren't ready or you didn't have, as you mentioned, the digital tools to have the access to the information, even the most talented of buyers would have had a hard time managing in such a short period of time the amount of information needed to make a quick decision on that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's very, very true. I think that, in a sense, we are shifting from a push to a pull model.
Yes, and with all of the I think different markets are going to react to previously owned or secondhand or refurbished or upcycled. I think recycled is a standard now, and it's I think it's going to continue to become more market wide available. But I think there is some value and kind of going back to the point of upcycling and to the point of the machine versus the person. No, you already have that denim jacket. You already have the handbag. Machine probably made that. But when you're talking about upcycling, it normally has a human intervention. It has an artistic intervention. It has something that a machine could do, but you would need a human input in order to make it better, to upcycle it. No, not just to remake it into another denim jacket. You need to make it into a limited edition denim jacket with some very specific inputs or interventions from someone that has the talent or at least an original idea. So I think those kind of those subsegments or subcultures are also guiding us to continue to reaffirm that that human contribution is going to continue to be quite necessary. And
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing that in the demand for personalization, in the sense of people a return to people wanting to do crafts, to things that involve individual creativity, uniqueness. So I definitely agree that we're seeing this as a trend, as a mindset, as a shift coming up in a very broad-based way.
for sure, and I think it's been very interesting to see how the market has trended on the different types of categories that were being sold. When lockdown started, then everyone got on the health bandwagon, and that maybe lasted for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then you start to see the sales of wine spiking, because
Right.
people want to take care of themselves, but they're also a little bit frustrated that they're still home. And then you start to see that stores that had maybe jigsaw puzzles started to run out because everyone was trying to do activities that would keep them engaged and keep the children occupied. And then no, so it's been very interesting to see that not there wasn't something that always sold through across the past
Yeah.
6 or 7 months, but it was like the microcycles, and they were happening at week's length.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think, you're the first person who I think has pointed out this concept of microcycles, but it's certainly very true because it was such an unusual experience for people that people at a consumer level were very reactive. So, and that's created these microcycles.
We were very fortunate because we started our transition into digital platforms. Liverpool was one of the first customers for SAP in Latin America, if not the first.
Oh, wow.
Late in the late '90s. So we've been an SAP partner for a very, very long period of time, and we went online with Centric last year. We started the implementation process with Centric, and fortunately, by the time this hit, we were about 70% done. So we were able to migrate quite quickly, which obviously on the results of the investment is phenomenal because we needed to get this done. Now there was no plan B anymore. So the company had invested in the tools, and when this hit was like, well, this is what we bought it for. Show me what it can do, and is the team ready? So the team stepped up. The tool was managed. Now, obviously, the onboarding team, the implementation, and everything. And fortunately, we were already on that path to integrate on kind of shared platforms that allowed us to transfer responsibility back and forth from operating offices. But as you've heard me say before, for me it's visionary, and it's a blessing for us to be in a part of a company that has a local on-site team in Asia that was able to operate while others were shutting down, and it gave us a good position, and we were learning quite quickly, and we took as much as the learning as we could as quickly as it was coming through to our desk. But I can understand, or I can imagine a world in which this wouldn't have been available to us, and I could have seen those levels of complexity pile on, in which you lose a lot of visibility. No, we would have lost a lot of visibility and traceability if we wouldn't have been ready or didn't have the tools available as well. So I think a talented team and a well-built digital network is. I'm not sure if it's the perfect balance because I'm not sure to what percentage each of them would contribute, but I think you do need both of them to survive in an extra or hyper competitive market.
Well, I think that your vision and your leadership has played a very fundamental role in making that happen. I mean, it's easy to talk about, but the fact that you saw that and you were able to lead your team and have through thick and thin is the reason why this has been a success for you and your company.
I think we wanted to be able to tell our story. We didn't we had decided time back that we didn't want to react to the market, and whatever our outcome was going to be, that it was in our hands. I think the sports analogy you sometimes hear, like, their future is in their hands, or their destiny is in their hands. And I think that's kind of the take that we had is whatever the outcome is going to be for us, that we are able to design it and make it happen. And if we have to adapt along the way, so be it. But at least we were not so willing to be caught with our fingers on the door. and kind of have to react to a difficult market without the information. So I think when you trust your people, and in this case, when my top management hands me the keys to a decision making process, and like, you have our trust, and you have the confidence, and you have the authority to make a decision, go make the decision. No, we're not there. So we can't understand. And by the time you report back and you ask us what, don't ask. You have a much wider context than we do in many of the decisions. And that's why there's confidence and trust for you to make those decisions. So make the call. No, you know what the company needs, you know what the guidelines are, you know what your team is capable of doing. Show us what you can do. So I think when you're put in that position, and you give people the opportunity to excel, they'll show you what they're made of.
I think that your company is quite progressive in terms of the way they think. So I think that overall has translated into a more positive experience than perhaps what other people have gone through.
As they say, how you make anything is how you make everything.
Right.
And our name comes from the fabric, from the label, all the way to the end consumer. So if something has to come back, it stops at us. No, there's no further back from us. So we have to be confident in what we put forward, because it does speak to the team, and it does speak to the customer. So everything we do does come branded by the Liverpool brand and by its identifiable color scheme. So we have to be very conscious that we're taking care of an 175-year-old brand that has gone through civil wars, Great Depressions, economic crises, the government changes, anything that you can imagine that's happened in the country. The company has been able to survive. So it's a testament, and it's also a good, obviously a large commitment and responsibility to continue to carry through and to try to build the next 175 years for the company.
I think your company is well positioned for the future, and they're very fortunate to have someone like yourself at the helm. Thank you, Stephen, for sharing so many important ideas, and every time I talk to you, I come away from it having learned so much. So thank you very much for sharing.
As do I. I always enjoy our conversations. I hope we give our listeners at least one idea to think back on the rest of their day.
I think you certainly have. If you enjoyed this episode, why not subscribe to our podcast so you'll never miss another episode? And if you're struggling to get your sourcing forecast report done, the current situation in sourcing is the answer to your prayers. It provides a sharp and concise snapshot of the situation in major sourcing nations along with key data in an easy-to-read format, of course. You can find details in the show notes for this podcast. Thank you, and see you in the next podcast.